And once that growth mindset paradigm really stuck in my thinking, I realized, okay, I might be terrible at this podcasting thing, but every time I record, every time I go through this process, I will get better. And when I really embraced that idea that I'm going to gain confidence and competence with every single episode, it was like a light just flipped. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take this ride. I'm going to stay with it. I remember another podcast, again, all these inspiring voices were sort of all part of the picture, but another podcaster said, you can't declare a verdict on this thing until you've at least published 100 episodes. And so, okay, I said, I'm going to give this a try. I was in my program at Vancouver Island University, and I looked around at my cohort of 45, and I said, I'm going to start interviewing my classmates and then just build it out from there.
I think one of the most underrated forms of professional learning today is actually podcasting and listening and also creating podcasts, but particularly in the kind of quality of podcasts that exist out there. And certainly it's a growing medium, and I'm not trying to, again, point this back to me in any way, but pointing to my guest today, which is Tim Cavey, who is a vice principal, but also a podcaster. And he's been doing this for a long time. He has done hundreds of episodes on his podcast, Teachers on Fire. And Tim has worked, as you heard from this previous quote, has gotten pretty good at this because he's invested the time and space to do it. And really, for teachers to look at the plethora of options and the guests that he has had during his podcast, it's a pretty wonderful wealth of resources. And you think about the way in which we struggle finding time, whether, certainly it's almost impossible to dedicate days for teachers to come together in traditional professional learning. But I'm still under the impression that we haven't done a great job as leaders in helping teachers navigate and package some of these things. So if you were to look through Tim's guest list and topics he's had, I know there's something for every teacher there. And even if that 30-minute, 40-minute podcast that he offers live on Saturday morning is something that will just get you started on a topic, but that's often what it takes to get teachers excited about the possibilities. So I just am grateful that Tim has committed to doing this kind of work and sharing this. It's pretty amazing at the end of the day when you calculate, if you looked at the speakers that he has on there and what the actual cost would be to actually have some of these people come into your school, it's a pretty high price, and yet here it is all for free. Grateful for Tim and his dedication and time to this. And our conversation today is about leadership, but it's also about his podcasting journey and the lessons he's learned along the way. And I just appreciate Tim so much, his dedication, his contribution to Canadian education. And I know you'll enjoy the insights that he shares today on my podcast with Tim Cavey. So truth be known, this is the latest interview I've ever done, simply because Tim lives on the West Coast and he works all day and he doesn't get home. So we do it later. So that's why it's dark over here. If you're watching it, I haven't put the lights up. Tim he's still got remnants of sunshine in the background. But anyways, Tim, good to have you on. Why don't you just give us a quick overview of, we'll get into some of the other stuff around podcasting, but just maybe in terms of what actually pays the bills and what kind of, where you spend your day, what does that look like? What are you doing right now? Where are you and how long you've been doing it?
Thank you so much for having me on, Dean. What a pleasure it is to be here. Yeah, I'm an elementary vice principal at an independent school in Vancouver, Canada. And so this is my 6th year in that position. And before that, I've bounced around with other independent schools in Surrey, Burnaby, and Winnipeg. So altogether, this is my 25th year in K-12 education. And I could go further, but that's a sort of, with broad strokes, the picture for me right now.
Well, and the one thing I wouldn't mind you explaining to people, because having spent quite a bit of time in British Columbia, I understand a little bit about the education system there, but it's a bit of a unique education system in terms of how independent schools actually have a connection to publicly funded education. So can you maybe just talk a little bit about how the struggle, again, I don't know the individual schools, they might vary, but generally speaking, there's not the same bifurcation as there might be in some other provinces.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? In our Canadian system, every province is a little different, or most of the provinces are different. In British Columbia, most independent schools are funded at a level of 50% per student. So they receive 50% of the funding that our public school counterparts would receive. And of course, no capital funding. And then there is a class of independent schools. There's a certain financial threshold. If you're spending past that financial threshold, then your provincial funding is reduced even further. I think it's something like 35%, something like that. My school is not in that category. But yeah, it's a comparable system to the province I left, the province I started my career in, Manitoba. It's actually quite similar to Manitoba in that regard. It's about 50% per student.
And I mean, I think it's funny, talking to many people in the purely public side of things who actually have a pretty good relationship with independent schools. They're not necessarily seen as, I mean, every school is a competition, even if it's just a public district beside you, but also feels like, and I've heard a number of people say that it makes us up our game, right? Like it makes everybody, there's just enough. I mean, we don't ever think of education in a competitive light. That's just not something we tend to talk about. But I think having to, look at what the school next by is offering and how they're setting things up, hopefully that encourages us to keep up and do the best we can with whatever resources we have.
I like to think of it in that sense, although I'm reluctant to call it a competition. We like to say we're partners. We offer something a little bit different than our public school counterparts down the road. And we're all on the same team. We all teach from the BC curriculum.
That's right.
And the instruction is fairly similar. So it's part of the independent school picture across the province, across our country. And it just adds, in my mind, it just adds diversity and richness to the educational landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, Tim, I think we'll talk a little bit, we'll get into some leadership conversations later on, but I kind of wanted to focus a little bit on your own journey as a podcaster. I mean, it's funny, like it seems like now the joke is that everybody has a podcast, right? Like it's a common thing, but I think you, and I would put myself in that category, have moved beyond sort of a lot of people start a podcast and it fizzles out after a year or two because it's hard and it's like, how do you do it? And, I don't think any of us do it for necessarily any financial gain. So maybe tell a little bit about your podcast and kind of how it got, why you even decide you wanted to start something like that.
I will try to condense the story. I love to tell it, and we could talk for a whole hour, Dean, just about podcasting and the state of podcasting, right? But I would say it was around, well, I'm not guessing, it was 2018 when I launched this thing. And I guess in the year or two leading up to it, I had really started to become a big podcast consumer. And back then when people used the word podcast, it really was audio only. And so that was a medium that I really come to appreciate. I'm a commuter and a solo commuter. And so I did a lot of listening, and I would go through financial, entrepreneurial, sports, politics. I mean, you name it. I was consuming it all and started building this library as a listener does. And I started to listen to this one entrepreneurial podcast called Entrepreneurs on Fire. And the creator was someone who really inspired me. Every day he would feature a different business, a different startup. And I started to think, wow, this is such a great, I really find so much value in this. I wonder if there are similar conversations happening in the K-12 space. And so I started to think, I bet you there is room. I bet you not many people are creating content like this. Well, come to find out, there are hundreds of educational podcasters out there. But at the time, I really wasn't too concerned about, what the quote unquote competition looked like. I was just excited. Yeah. And a number of things coincided at the same time. I stumbled across a platform called Anchor, which allowed me to produce and syndicate the podcast free of charge, which is amazing. Since then, Anchor's been bought out by Spotify, and that's now my host. I also was starting a master's program, which we might talk about in a moment. And one of the books that I was required to read was Mindset by Carol Dweck. And once that growth mindset paradigm really stuck in my thinking, I realized, okay, I might be terrible at this podcasting thing, but every time I record, every time I go through this process, I will get better. And then when I really embraced that idea that I'm going to gain confidence and competence with every single episode, it was like a light just flipped. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take this ride. I'm going to stay with it. I remember another podcast, again, all these inspiring voices were sort of all part of the picture, but another podcaster said, you can't declare a verdict on this thing until you've at least published 100 episodes. And so, okay, I said, I'm going to give this a try. I was in my program at Vancouver Island University, and I looked around at my cohort of 45, and I said, I'm going to start interviewing my classmates and then just build it out from there. And lo and behold, it's been really like people will ask me, Tim, how do you find guests? Well, Dean, that you get requests every single day. Like there's no shortage of guests out there. And most education leaders we reach out to are happy to chat about education. So it's been, you're right, it hasn't been financially lucrative, but it's been something that gives me a lot of joy. And in my current role, I find it really helpful because here I am sitting down with education leaders like yourself almost every week. And I'm just talking education, and that just keeps my mind in good spaces. And I'm always learning through the podcast. So it's been a rewarding journey. I've had a lot of fun doing it.
How many episodes have you done?
I am up to around 325.
Okay, so you're long past the 100 mark.
Yeah.
So that is just awesome. And like, what would you say if you look back? And again, I know if you're like me, I don't go back and look at a lot of stuff because it's hard to listen and watch yourself. But I mean, just whether you've done that or just in your own mind, when you look back at the first, 10 episodes.
Yeah.
And now, and because you have, having been on your show, you've got a pretty tight system. You've got a groove in kind of how you're doing things. So what would you say has been, going from maybe don't think you're not very good early on, but like what is the obvious improvement do you think and most proud of in kind of the evolution over 300 episodes?
I've never been asked that question. I love it. I think probably the most significant pivot or change was moving into YouTube in a video format. And I was posting my audio episodes on YouTube for a long time, thought nothing of it, just thought, here's another place to sort of dump my audio content. Probably no one will listen. Well, actually, people do listen to audio only content, but it was my wife at one point who said, you're having these conversations. Why not record the video as well? And of course, that was a great call on her part. And then since then, we've only seen a rise in video podcasting and people really enjoy that kind of content. And so the channel's actually grown considerably since then. Well, in our world, it's grown considerably. And so I would say that's been a big difference. And then I can point to little technical improvements that I've made along the way as well that have really increased the quality of what I deliver as well.
Well, and again, when I tell people, it doesn't matter if I'm talking about blogging, which I've done for, 20 plus years, or podcasting, which I've been doing off and on for, 15 years. I have to enjoy it. Like, it has to be something that like I actually care about, because I always say, like, I don't care if anybody else listens to it. I get to speak to Tim Cavey. I get to talk to this person. That seems like it's like, I really tried to think of it as, wouldn't it be cool if you could just go for coffee with like a lot of people and just like pick their brain? And that's what I get to do. Like, that it's a pretty cool honor to be able to do that one. When you look back at your 300 plus episode, is there like a moment or two that stood out, whether it was like, a guest that you really wanted to have on that you were kind of surprised they said yes, or just even something that somebody said, regardless of where they are, they were just like, man, that's really resonated with me or kind of made a big difference in me. So what are kind of the highlights of Teachers on Fire podcast?
Just constantly, like I said earlier, I'm constantly learning from guests. And I think of even just guests this year. So recently I interviewed a colleague, Edmund Chin, who's a high school teacher, and he really inspired me to make running a bigger part of my life in 2026. I guess I actually technically interviewed him was it in January? Anyway, he inspired me to run 1,000 kilometers this year. I'm well on my way to that goal. It's been transformative for my health. I just ran the best sun run, Vancouver 10-kilometer sun run time that I've ever run in 18 years and 11 attempts on Sunday this past weekend. So that was a guest who really inspired me to make a change in my life. Speaking more along the lines of education, I interviewed a principal named Rich Chiz from New Jersey who inspired me to do something a little different in my own school context with a school podcast. That's been a lot of fun. And I also interviewed Becky King, who's written a book called AI Optimism. And she really gets me thinking on TikTok and on Instagram, wherever I find her content. And so I reached out to her. We had a great conversation, and I've engaged with her book, and I've also begun doing some recording out in my neighborhood. And I want to do more of that as well. And that's something that she does. That's sort of how I came across her content. So I feel like I'm just always absorbing these little ideas, these little suggestions that come from different guests. And it's a long list. I should have really done a better job. I was tracking for a while, Dean, the changes to my practice and my life that sort of came about from different guests, but I need to get back to that.
And I mean, maybe things are different for you, but I mean, you don't get a lot of feedback on your podcast. Like, for example, like to me, like people don't leave comments. So, I mean, what happens with me is sort of my own little, like I'll get people who will either, they might throw a comment, but that's just rare, or more often than not, they see me in person saying, hey, I really loved your podcast. That's kind of when they'll feel like to do it. So I don't get a lot of it. But what about you? Like, what do you get in terms of just the acknowledgement or the knowledge that, oh, I guess this is helping people, or people are so like this is no different than being a classroom teacher. You know, this kids aren't very good at coming up to you and say, well, thank you so much for teaching my class. Like when it happens, it's like, wow, that's pretty awesome. So again, any bits of feedback that kind of keep you going or encourage you along the way.
I agree. I think for any creator, some validation is needed. And I've heard podcasters, some of our peers say, oh, it doesn't matter if anyone listens. And I guess a few moments ago, you said a version of that, right? We do it for the joy
I do
of
like
it.
people to listen.
Of course, right. Validation is helpful because we're getting that feedback that says we're going in the right direction. We're creating and sharing content of value. So of course, an obvious answer is the metrics. If you can see some metrics starting to go up over time, that's helpful. But I've seen a few comments, Dean, on YouTube and Spotify this year. Very few, you're right. Most of our podcaster listeners, and I see that, the show's been downloaded in virtually every country of the world, but very, very few comments. So I'm glad now that Spotify, which only I would say something like 20% of my listeners come through that platform, but Spotify allows comments. I'd really like Apple Podcasts to open up the same. I'm waiting for Apple. Come on, Apple. Allow comments on episodes. But so that's been good. There's been a little bit of interaction there. And probably my number one social media platform where I get actual engagement with educators right now is LinkedIn. I think you're enjoying LinkedIn as well. And I guess I would say there I'm getting real conversations and engagement with other educators. And sometimes there's a reference to the content, sometimes there's not, but you feel like you're engaged with the community, similar to the feeling maybe we had a decade ago at Teacher Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I can only sort of look at my own habits. Like you, I consume a lot of podcasts, but I don't leave them comments. I don't offer. I tell other people about, hey, I listen to this podcast, but the actual creators have no idea. And I mean, in some cases, I just assume, they're why would they care about my own comment? And but again, you're right though. It's just it's a bit of a weird format. I mean, I could probably make the argument that the initial idea of blogging was that people would be commenting, and they did more so, and then that faded away. Then that sort of trailed off into teacher Twitter for a while. And now you're right. LinkedIn is kind of, the space where if there's going to be any conversation, that's where it happens. So if you can sort of use that space, which is again, what I've done, but yeah, it's just challenging. You mentioned that you're in the midst of a master's course. So I maybe talk about, were you mentioning that your podcast and your master's class, there's a bit of an overlap, or what did you want to share about that?
So that degree is complete, but it coincided kind of with the launch of the podcast. So, I began that program. A shout out to Vancouver Island University again. The Master's in Educational Leadership program was was transformative, I would say, in my thinking. Began that in 2017. And then in my second year, really focused on thesis work, and I built it around the podcast, actually, and the way that podcasting content can fuel changes in professional practice. And fortunately, I got enough listeners. Teacher Twitter was enough of a thing at the time that I was able to share a link to my survey and have enough people to respond that I could actually use that data and apply it toward my thesis work. But that was the topic, and that really cemented, of course, this whole thing around Teachers on Fire and this hobby that continues to supplement my professional learning.
So why, again, everybody has their own kind of theories and opinions on why podcasting is a valuable niche, if you will,
Right.
for professional learning. What's your kind of thoughts on why is it that?
Oh, that's a softball. That's a juicy one. But podcasting as a medium is just, it remains almost sacred because of the audio nature. You can listen to it on the commute. You can listen to it while you're washing dishes, while you're mowing the lawn. It's start, stop. You can rewind, replay. And people are more comfortable settling into a podcast, I would say, than they are with other forms of media. It's harder to get, I mentioned that I have a YouTube channel. It's harder to get viewers to stick around for a full 30, 40 minutes, whether they're watching on their phone, computer, TV. People get restless. They want to go do something else. But there's something about the audio only medium that people really will settle into. Once they've listened for a minute, they're probably in, assuming the content is good, the topic is relevant. So I think for that reason, it's got a staying power for sure. And it probably, truthfully, and this is a whole other sort of subtopic here, but truthfully, our schools and districts probably could be doing a better job. I think it's starting. I think it's growing, but I think we could be doing a better job of using it as a professional learning internal tool. So for schools and districts, associations to actually be saying, we want to make this our focus this year. Here's a series of lectures or conversations, roundtable conversations, and then we're going to meet in small groups, once a week or whatever it happens to be, to debrief from this week's episode. There could be more professional learning happening that way, a little bit of the flipped classroom idea. So I do think some schools and districts are starting to build that way.
They are. No, and I agree. And I always, you think about it, it's almost our oldest form of communication is oral, right? And there's something though about, having your earbuds on. There's an intimacy, right? That comes from like, I'm listening to this person. And then of course, as a host, you develop a rapport, a relationship with people that they're comfortable listening to you because they kind of know what's ahead. Like you've kind of established yourself in a way that's like, all right, I'm, and I think people can relate to that when they think about, I go back to, the days of, well, now we have, people like Adrian Arsenal or Knowlton Nash or Peter Mansbridge, like these newscasters, right? That even though we weren't that interested about their lives, but the way they welcome people in made me feel like, all right, I can consume whatever they're presenting to me. So I think there's something to that, but I agree with you in terms of the opportunity for schools, because I think about, I remember being in meetings, at a district level, and I just think, man, we should have recorded this because there was so much rich conversation, right? The time that people spent. And I thought, like, what if you did that? And I get it. There's all kinds that's maybe not the simplest way to do it, but you could, leave that meeting and talk to your superintendent or your principal or a teacher and say, could you just summarize what you heard in the last 10 minutes that might be valuable, that other people would be privy to? Because I always feel like that is such a gap in schools and school districts, that there's rich conversations happening that the teachers, the parents, or whomever that are impacted by it aren't privy to.
Right.
And we, a memo is fine, but yeah, I think there's something really, and I mean, the crazy thing is like how easy it is. Like, I get it. Like there's work to it, but I mean, really at the end of the day, podcasting has not evolved much more than, and just get a computer, a microphone, and you're kind of good to go. Like you can jazz it up a bit, but that's really all you need.
It's true. And there are entrepreneurial voices out there who are telling us to do that. Like bring a camera around with you, record every meeting, every phone call. Of course, in our space, that's impossible because we're going
Sure.
to drive people crazy.
Yes.
People
Yeah.
aren't going to respond well to that in a perceived invasion of privacy, obviously. So, but I agree. There are so many moments that you just wish you could clip. Like, wow, that 30 seconds would be so valuable for the whole district to hear.
Yeah.
And maybe there are some ways. Maybe there are some openings, some certain settings where we could bring that in.
Yeah, I hope so. How would you like beyond the content that you consume and and that you've presented as a podcast host, any kind of other lessons that you've taken from your time podcasting that have translated into your role as a vice principal or an educator in general? Like what? And again, maybe that's not a great question, but I always just think educators are usually pretty good at extracting all kinds of experiences and applying it to the educational context. So we'll see if you've got something for that.
Well, it might be too obvious, but where my mind goes, if I'm hearing your question correctly, is you talked about the discipline and the fact that some weeks we may not feel like it. One of the reasons I record live, Dean, on my shows, just frankly, to create a social obligation. I've got a date Saturday a.m. or 8 a.m., pardon me, with Dean Shareski. I'd better show up because if I don't, shame on me, right? So that's one of the reasons why I set up this weekly engagement to go live. I've posted to my network, I'm going to have this guest. And then it creates that discipline so that on a normal Saturday morning, I would be sleeping in, I'd be doing other perhaps lazy things or whatever it might be. But instead, I'm going to set aside these 1 or 2 hours in my weekend, just as the weekend gets started, to sharpen my thinking and try to elevate my practice. And I guess the principle is just when I bring that into the leadership context is we show up faithfully. And as one famous writer said, when the education leader sneezes, the whole building catches a cough. So to some extent, our work is performance. We show up, we're happy, we're positive. Yes, we have to be authentic, we have to be real, but people are looking to us to be a source of positive energy. You model that so well in your work. I attempt to do that in mine. And so that's a little bit of the same principle, right? We show up for this work regardless of whether we're feeling like it that particular weekend or not. For anyone listening who's not a content creator, if you tell yourself, I'll record every time I'm in the mood, you're not going to record very consistently. It's just not going to happen. So there are some.
It's a little bit like exercising.
Yeah, exactly. And similar principles apply there too. Sometimes we have to experience a little discomfort to earn the reward, right? But yeah, that's where my mind goes.
Do your students ever ask you about it?
They know about it. They've come across it.
Too cool
right?
to ask you. They're too cool to ask you about it, probably.
Well, sometimes I'll have elementary kids coming up and telling me, Mr. Cavey, I subscribe to your channel. And I think, oh, okay, well, if you understand how the YouTube algorithm works, you actually don't want that. But I can't tell a little kid, oh, please unsubscribe, right? So no, it's fun. And I get some, I did wonder, Dean, going into the podcast, how colleagues, and I've taught at different schools now over the years, how colleagues would respond. But overwhelmingly, they've been positive and encouraging and have cheered me on, which has been just so fantastic.
Well, and your whole podcast is about shining the light on other people. So I mean, I hope I do the same thing too. So I mean, there's that I think can't be seen other than you're just you're creating great content for people. So I think kudos to you.
Thanks.
Let's just shift gears a little bit and talk, because again, show's called The Leadership Show. I just like people to share a leadership challenge that they face. And I often frame it as it could even be a challenge that you did something poorly, like you didn't handle it well, but you learned from it, or something that you maybe came through the other side and just learned a lot, because that's how we grow. Like those challenges are there. So it could be anything, could be something recent, could be something from a long time ago, but whatever you like, your call, a leadership challenge.
I've got a good one for you. I came to my current school. I walked in 2020, fall of 2020. So you know what was going on at that time. And so teachers were sort of on high alert. We were all fully masked, of course. We don't even like to talk about it, right? We all have a little bit of PTSD from those years. But Times were really difficult. I was new stepping into an administrative part-time teaching, part-time administrator role. And I decided it would be a great idea to encourage the middle school teachers to move into an online portfolio platform called Seesaw. You've probably heard of it. You're probably familiar with it. And looking back, it was just not the right time. It wasn't done the right way. And because I was the main instrument sort of pushing teachers into this, I hadn't spent any time building trust or relationship. And so complicating that, of course, was, the COVID conditions. So you've got stressed teachers, tired teachers. We're doing all of the protocols and structures and things associated with the pandemic. And then you've got this new administrator pushing teachers to immerse themselves and start using this new platform. And to their credit, teachers were overwhelmingly optimistic and gave it a go. But I do know it was hard for some teachers to accept, like, oh, here we go with another tool. Why are we doing this? And I just hadn't spent any time. And looking back, I think one of the key rules or principles that principle LES, right, that we need to keep in mind is you need time to build trust. Don't change a whole lot the first year. And if I could do things again, I would have taken my time on that one and just said, I'm here to help. It's COVID. It's a pandemic. I'm here to help. We're not going to change the system you're comfortable with. I'm just here to support you. And I think that would have been a better move. And that's my takeaway.
Well, and I appreciate that, because I think self-awareness is potentially the greatest thing a leader has to have, is being able to realize, oh, I didn't handle that correctly. And listen, I mean, I think about teachers. I think about my time as a teacher and all of the things I said to kids over the years. I'm sure I said things that, were not the best things, because we have to make all those decisions. But yeah, I think just being aware of that and be able to, of course, but that's just something you learn when you're, those are learning modes. So my next question kind of follows into that. So besides the need to build trust, which is obviously the lesson that you learned there, like, what advice would you give to a young educator who's thinking about maybe a role as a principal, vice principal, or something beyond their current maybe teaching role, but they're interested in it? Like, what advice do you give them, and as far as how they can kind of move into that role?
A couple of things come to mind. I would say start serving your team now. Start serving and leading before the role. And leadership in education often means service of different kinds. So start sharing resources, start supporting initiatives, start leading teams where you can, and be a positive force. And people will start to recognize that desire in you, and people will start to recognize the values that you stand for. And so that title will sort of find its way to you if you're looking for greater responsibility and impact, influence in your context. Then I would just say start leading before the title. I'm sure that's advice that's been shared many times. The other piece I would say too is, just from my own experience, start that master's degree before you get along too far on the journey. I waited until I was 40, and that was way too long. I should have started 10 years earlier. And I remember, I think it was around 2010, I applied for a program at UBC and didn't get in. And that was discouraging to get a no. And look back, it's so silly. It's one institution. But I got that no, and I just sort of checked out for a while. And I said, I'm just going to go back to teaching. This isn't for me. And that was not a very healthy, not a very growth mindset response, Tim Cavey. So if I could go back and do it again, that's what I would do, is just get into a master's program. And again, not just to gain a title or something else, but my program just re-energized me, and it really introduced me to a lot of other education leaders that were thinking and learning in positive directions. And it just, any staleness in my career was just sort of washed away during my program, and I was sort of revived. So those are my two pieces of advice for sure.
No, that's great. And that second piece, I think, obviously people are in different seasons of life. So a 25-year-old, I don't know, maybe they're newly married or something, like, or have but there's always a thing. I mean, I was slightly younger than you and I started, but like not much. I had kids. So everybody's got a thing. So there's probably never a great time to start. But I think to your point, I think the thing that I've noticed too, and again, I can only speak from my experience, you can only speak from yours, is that there's so many great programs out there that really do cater to full-time educators who, they're playing a lot of roles. And especially if you can find a program that, number one, as you said, you're connecting to a lot of really bright people, but also the program itself, and the fact that you were able to weave your podcasting passion into your actual programming. And I had the same kind of luxury too, because I had great advisors and people who just wanted me, whatever I did, like make it practical. Like, so I always felt like I was cheating because I was doing a thing that I was actually going to do anyway as part of my role in the district. And I was actually getting university credit for it for my grad studies, where I just thought, well, this is unbelievable.
Action research.
Yeah. So I love that encouragement. And honestly, I asked that question to a lot of people and no one has ever given me that one. So I appreciate that one.
There we
go. But I want to just dive into something you mentioned it earlier. You talked about it again, is you talk about growth mindset. I think most people are aware of Carol Dweck's work and we talk about growth mindset, but the way you framed it, especially earlier on, like this was really impactful, like something triggered for you. I just like you to kind of go back into that and dive a little bit more, like what was the missing thing that Tim didn't have? And so all of a sudden, crap, that's what this is.
Carol Dweck really unpacks. I'm hesitating, Dean, because I feel like every educator has heard this, but I'll give you my perspective and maybe something
Well, I
new
want the personal story, because you're right. It's like I'm saying, it is not a brand new concept, but when a person speaks of it personally, as opposed to the broad concept, I think there's something valuable in that.
In a nutshell, I guess the way I connect it with my own story, and I mentioned a moment ago when I applied for one master's program and was denied. So she talks about how the fixed mindset sees events like that as confirmation. This is who I am, right? This is what I'm capable of. This is what I'm limited to. And we see that in our classrooms, right? A student has trouble with something. If they are living in a fixed mindset kind of a paradigm, they're going to interpret that as confirmation that I'm no good, or the kids will say, I suck at this, right? And what we want to gently push, call, warmly demand our learners into is a mindset that says, oh no, actually, if you go back to the gym analogy, when you're encountering some discomfort, when you're encountering hardship, that's actually a good sign that we're pushing forward into some new territory. And there may be some very rare exceptions, but by and large, that's a rule that you can apply across a lot of life. And so to be denied from one program, I mean, come on, that should have been a minor setback. That's a signal to apply at 20 more. And at the time, I'm disappointed to say that I had decided UBC was the school that I wanted to try. This is the program I selected. And so this is just confirmation that I'm just not the one, or my profile isn't attractive enough, or whatever. And I wish I had taken the point of view that says, no, when we're encountering some setbacks, when you record podcast episode number 1 and it goes terribly and the audio ends up in 5 different pieces, as it did for me, that's not confirmation that I'm a terrible podcaster and this will not work. That's actually a sign that I'm in a new space of learning. And as I move forward, it's going to get better. And there's some growth that's going to happen. In British Columbia, we would say I'm an emerging learner, or I'm a developing learner, and there is more learning ahead. And so it completely transforms the way you look at adversity. And of course, I have to continually challenge myself with that, but that's how I apply it to my journey.
Well, you're making me think about, a couple of issues that are really relevant today that I hadn't previously connected the growth mindset to. And that is the whole challenge we're facing with AI and people worried about cognitive offloading or cognitive stunting, right? And kids or adults' use of AI because something's hard, because writing's hard, AI will get me over that next time. Instead of having the growth mindset, of course it's hard. It's supposed to be hard, and hard is not a bad thing. It's part of the growth, part of growing. So I think there's maybe some ways in which we kind of take that very well-known idea and continue to apply it to some of the challenges that we're facing today. So I appreciate that perspective. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
So last question, and then I've got 3 quick ones to get you out of here. And this is always the one that people struggle with. Name one person, just one, that you're grateful for in education. Could be a coworker, a mentor, but it's just got to be one.
I like that you limit it, Dean, because I've tried to limit it as well. And I know what guests will do with that, but I will honor that and say Mark Ryan. I'm going to shout out Mark Ryan. He's a Canadian educator in Abu Dhabi. He also works at an independent school over there, and he shows up in my LinkedIn feed. I'm sure you've come across him as well. I think you have. And he's just always a source of positivity. He's learning. He models the learning. He's telling a positive story about the learning at his school and in his education community. And he's just doing so many things well. If you think about, as a school leader, what do I want my educators to be doing with social media? Well, you want them to be sharing the story of learning, the story of the mission of your school. And he does it so well, and he does it in a way that inspires me. So shout out to Mark Ryan.
All right. Awesome. All right. 3 quick ones to get you. What are you reading or listening to? So, you're a podcast listener, so it could be a podcast or it could be a book you're reading for professional growth.
Many great podcasts out there. The book that I will single out, and I've got many books on the go, but the one that is scaring me, Dean, is The Digital Delusion by Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath. Wow, he's got people thinking and talking, and there are other voices like him. Of course, it's sort of adjacent to the work by Jonathan Haidt at The Anxious Generation. But yes, this book, The Digital Delusion, is really sort of casting doubt on the narrative that we've adopted over the last 20 years regarding ed tech. And I think a lot of good conversations will follow. I consider myself a little bit of a technophile. I've been a quick adopter over the years, but he was really getting me thinking about the role of technology in the classroom. And you can see schools and districts sort of rethinking their positions and practices. So it's an exciting time. People are being really thoughtful, and that book is a part of it.
Well, you're the second person. I think it was my 6-year-old uncle from Portland texted me and said, "Have you read this book?" So now I am curious about this book. But with regards to that, I guess one of the things that I've come to embrace, especially a bit, the work that I'm doing with AI, is the fact that I'm open to be wrong about lots of things, right? Like I'm fine with it. I'm trying to, also not be so insular around my own experience with technology, which I think, like you, has been largely positive, and I'm grateful that I can do all kinds of things with technology, and it's a big part of my life now. If it were to all go away, it'd still be fine. I have a great life, as you do too. Like it's all good. But the way in which we have maybe foisted it upon, and it's been sort of pushed in society, I think I haven't read the book, so obviously I can't speak to it, but I feel that one of the things that I think we're tasked to do as educators is to elevate this very specific conversation with ourselves and with our communities. And I hope it goes more, and I'm sure, again, the book isn't so simplistic to say, well, just get rid of technology. That's not usually what anybody's suggestion is. And so what does that look like? So I think it's, like you said, so I think I'm now tasked to read that book because I do want to kind of again challenge my own thinking. I'm not afraid for somebody for me to be wrong or other things, and just to rethink sort of thing. So I appreciate that recommendation. All right, so I know you're a sports fan as well, but listen, we all have to take time just to sort of unwind, and I always like it if you can give me the show you're binging, watching with you and your wife, or however you want to frame it. The trashier, the better too. Like I've had some really good ones. I've had some good ones on this show that I think that I always like to hear what people like to binge.
I guess our guilty pleasure. You mentioned my wife. So the one, I wasn't going to mention this one, but over spring break, we binged Love is Blind. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's fun. It was a lot of fun. I think it's the case in many partnerships that the Netflix profiles don't have a great degree of overlap, but we both had a lot of laughs.
You gotta find a couple that you both will watch.
Exactly.
Sometimes you have to concede, like, I wouldn't pick them, but I know you like this. We should watch something together. So I know what you're saying. I know of what you speak. All right, Love is Blind. Ours is, I think, more the Love on the Spectrum one is a big one.
Yeah.
In our house, they really like. Anyway,
Fine.
Last question. So you can choose Langley, you can choose Vancouver where you work. But listen, very popular. People know all these spaces, but I want you to give me the hidden gem. Like, what's the place I should check out? Could be a restaurant, could be a park. It could be just something that maybe people might not come across on their first Google search of things to do in Langley or things to do in Vancouver. What's your hidden gem?
Okay, so I've got the perfect one. It's called the Lift Bar and Grill in Cole Harbour, beautiful Vancouver, and it's got free parking. People don't realize that. People always think downtown Vancouver parking is going to be terrible everywhere.
Wow, this is a big tip right here.
Oh, I can set you up, Dean. I can set you up with some great free parking spots. The Lift Bar and Grill, you'll sit on a beautiful patio. Find a sunny day. That's important. That piece is important. Sunny day. You'll have your beverage, your delicious food. You're overlooking the marina and the mountains, and you're watching the float planes take off. So the Lift Bar and Grill, Cole Harbour, just a spectacular area. I'm going to live there someday.
Okay.
At least that's what I keep telling Mrs. Cavey, and
yes,
that's my pick.
All right. Well, you had me at free parking. Listen, Tim, thank you so much. I know you had a long day, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I appreciate your contributions to the education space. I think people need to acknowledge that there's a lot of people like yourself who are putting in a lot of time, creating content for free and letting people sort of, learn from that. I think podcasting, we didn't say it specifically, but is an underrated professional development tool, right? That
Hear, hear.
is so accessible. Where else are you going to get this kind of stuff? So thank you so much for that work. Thank you for your work with kids. Appreciate your leadership, and have all the best.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you so much for all the great work you're doing, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely.